Welcome on YouTube and welcome back for the second episode in this Becoming a Barrister series. So in this episode, I basically just want to go through my BPC selection event. So after I'd kind of decided to go down the barrister route, I wanted to study in Manchester, I wanted to study at the University of Law, so I applied to the University of Law for the BPC. Part of this application, I needed to sign up, put in all my details. I was applying for the advocacy scholarship, so I also sent in a CV and a cover letter as part of the application. After a couple of weeks, I got my confirmation email saying I passed the first stage of the application because I had to submit a personal statement. So I took my time with that, wrote a nice personal statement, got a few different people to check that. One was a current student, one was someone that's doing their pupillage, and one was an ex-lecturer of mine. So I got a couple of different levels of people to read over that and give me some feedback. Got that application in, passed the first stage, got a confirmation of passing the first stage, and got invited to a BPC selection event. So basically, this BPC selection event is an event that the University of Law put together with everyone that's applied, that's passed the first stage, to assess who they want to accept and to go through a kind of assessment of the key attributes that advocates would require. It's not something that was expected to be professional level, but they just want to see passion for law. They want to see these kind of foundational skills so that someone that's got no clue what they're doing gets placed in the course and it's kind of a waste of time. So there was a few different elements to this selection event. They all reflected an opportunity for the applicants to show my skills to them, just showcase my skills so that they could see who I am, what I'm about, if I'm any good for the course. So the first step was I signed up for the event, I logged into the system, I found a date and a time that suited me. There was a selection of dates and times, 2 or 3 events per week, up to like in a month in advance for me to sign on to. The actual event was going to be 3 hours long. When I signed up for it, it said that there was basically 2 stages to it. There's a plea and mitigation and an interview. So once I'd signed up, booked my place on a selection event 2 weeks later to give myself plenty of time to revise and prep for it. In terms of revision, my main revision focus area was the plea and mitigation. So I spent a few hours on YouTube, looked at example plea and mitigations, looked at previous plea and mitigations from Uni of Law students, mooting competition plea and mitigations, professionals giving their advice on plea and mitigations. So I did a lot of different research on plea and mitigations, how people approach them, what sort of tips people have. Bearing in mind, when I signed up for the event, it said that you didn't need to do any revision. It didn't require any revision, and that on the day you would have sufficient prep time and you'd be given all the information needed. But something that I have learned is that even if something says that it doesn't require revision or it doesn't require any prior knowledge, it's always good to, if the situation allows, if there's time, no time restraints and this sort of thing, to revise, to have prior knowledge and all this sort of stuff, because it will put you in a better place going into that event than if you don't have an experience or you don't have any prior knowledge or you haven't revised. So I did revise and it paid off 100%. So that was the main area of revision that I did. I also did some revision on the interview section. I revised questions that they might ask because a friend of mine that has done the BBC told me that the questions are likely to be similar to the sort of questions that they would ask you in a pupillage interview. So I did a bit of research on that. One of the things I looked at was a website that gave tips on pupillage called Pupillage and How to Get It, and that's basically a website run by 2 barristers where they talk about what pupillage is, give you tips on how to get pupillage, different approaches and all this sort of thing. And one area that they have is questions that you get asked in a pupillage interview, and they break them down into different categories because when you have a pupillage interview there's different categories of questions. I wanted to get an idea of these questions because I felt that I would ask similar sort of questions. There was a few things that weren't relevant, there was a few questions that weren't relevant because they were very much relevant to the later stages of becoming a lawyer, whereas at this point the questions asked weren't directly to do with being a lawyer because they were more wanting to assess the foundation skills of public speaking, advocacy, confidence, passion for law, these sort of things. So I did a bit of prep on that. I looked at these kind of questions, thought of a few questions myself, wrote a few ideas, a few answers, and I went through personal experiences, past experiences, to look for examples and get myself ideas of examples that I could use to answer questions, because there's no way I'm going to know exactly what questions they ask. So I needed to have a backlog of information so that when they ask the questions I don't freeze and have to think for ages about something I've been through, but instead I've got fresh in my memory different examples, different experiences I've been through, which I can then use as examples. And then the last area of revision that I did, I just went over my personal examples, but also like CV, cover letter and stuff, because I put in personal statement, put in a CV, put in a cover letter. I went over those just to refresh myself on what I've written about in case they asked me questions based on that. And it turns out that that was a piece of revision that I didn't need to do, because when the interview's taken place, it's an independent interview done by someone that hasn't seen other areas of your application. And this isn't necessarily for all BPC courses, but it was the case for the University of Law when I applied. When I was interviewed, the lady that interviewed me hadn't seen my cover letter, hadn't seen my CV, hadn't seen my personal statement, so she didn't ask me any questions on those documents. However, I could still use examples and answers that I'd written about in those documents. That was fine, but she wasn't directly asking me, tell me about this work experience you did in 2019, for example. So I didn't need to do that, but it's still good because it still refreshed my memory and gave me some good examples to use. The day rolled round. The morning of the selection event, I got myself ready. I had some on-the-day prep to do, so the event was online, but I still wanted to look the part, I still wanted to look presentable and that, so I got up, had a shower, all of this sort of stuff, got myself ready, got myself looking neat and tidy, chucked on a suit. I was just going to wear a shirt and a jacket because I thought it was that was the vibe, a bit more smart casual. Just before I started, I went upstairs, spoke to my dad and that, and he said, put a tie on. And I said, like, I don't think it's about things more smart casual. And he said, I'll put a tie on if I was you. So I put a tie on because, listen, he's 60 odd years old, do you know what I mean? He's got a lot more experience in the professional world. He knows what he's talking about. So thank you, Dad, shout out for that. Put a tie on, and who knows, that could have made a big difference. Looking smart and tidy could have made a big difference. So, but I just wanted to do it properly, look the part, you know, be appropriate and all that, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so I prepped myself before I started, prayed and all that, got myself a bottle of water ready. Just little bits like that, just making sure that I was comfortable and had everything I need, notepad and paper, whatever documents I needed to open on my monitor, all my equipment was working, microphone, camera, all of this sort of stuff. Then I logged in, so I logged into the Zoom and everyone entered the room and that, and the selection event started with an introduction to the event. The lady that was running the event, she basically explained what the event was, gave us a breakdown of the different parts to the event, and also she spoke a bit about the bar course itself, went through a bit of an explanation of the bar course at the University of Law, the different elements to it. So she gave us a bit of an introduction to the course. Then she explained about the plea mitigation. So she explained that after the introduction, we would be sent the information, would be sent the documents, the case that we were going to prepare a plea mitigation for. We would have 40 minutes to prep the plea mitigation. So they would send over the documents, we'd have 40 minutes, and then after the 40 minutes were up, we would present our plea mitigation. There was only 2 or 3 or 4 interviewers, and there was however many, 10 or whatever applicants. So whilst others were giving their plea mitigation and having their interview, everyone else would be in a waiting room, and in that waiting room we'd have the opportunity to ask questions and discuss the course and all this sort of stuff. So we'd either go straight into the plea, or you'd wait in the waiting room and then you'd go into your plea. You'd present your plea mitigation, which was 5 minutes long, so it was a 5-minute plea, you had to stick to that, and then straight away after you've completed your plea mitigation, you would be interviewed, and then after the interview was finished, the event concluded and you could leave. So she went through all of this sort of stuff, explained that all. And then when she'd finished, they emailed us the task. We all muted and cameras off, and spent 40 minutes prepping for the plea in mitigation task. I won't go into too much detail on either the plea or the interview, because I'm going to do a separate video where I really go into a lot of detail and break down my plea and then my interview and examples of what was good and examples of how to do it better. Basically, it's 40 minutes. I spent the 40 minutes, I prepped, I went through it all, and this was where the revision that I'd done really came in handy, because the case that I read was completely new to me, but there was a lot of things that stood out. There was key points that stood out which I knew were very relevant to the plea because of the pleas that I'd watched and the tips that people had given me. I already had my eyes out for these key pointers, which I knew I could expand upon and really use to my advantage. So I prepped that. I read through the case a couple times, I made some notes, and I kind of wrote out an outline for my plea, and I even had time to practice it once before going in. So once I'd prepped, we went into the waiting room. I was one of the last people to give my plea, so we're in the waiting room for a short period of time, probably 20 minutes or so, I'd say. And while we're there, people that had already completed the BPC and students that were doing it at the moment, there was a couple of them in the room as well, and so we had the opportunity to ask some questions. So one of the ladies started by getting us to go around and just introduce ourselves, say our name, say kind of what we were doing. There's quite a few people that were still studying in final year of the law degree. I'm graduated, so I said, look, I'm graduated, I'm in a gap year, I've done a bit of travelling and I work in a coffee shop. That's basically what I said, which was interesting because the lady that was running it said that when she went for her pupillage interview, she had worked in a coffee shop, and they asked her some coffee related questions and some questions on working in the coffee shop. So that was really interesting to hear. how they could ask you questions on all sorts of different things. And then we had the opportunity to ask some questions, so we discussed where different people were planning to study, their approaches to studying, accommodation, tips on the actual studies itself from the current students, things that have gone well for them, approaches that they've used. Just small talk questions really, but yeah, just talking about the course and getting a few little tips and tricks and answering any questions that we had. Eventually I got called in for my plea mitigation. I had my GoPro ready. I had the camera set up on my computer. I had my GoPro by the side and I had my phone on the other side with the timer to make sure that I could stick to time. So I got into the room, pressed go on the GoPro, started the timer, presented my plea mitigation. I think it was about 4 minutes 30 in the end, so I didn't run over, which is good. I maybe could have spoken a little bit slower. And like I say, I won't go into too much details about that because I will do another probably 2 videos on the plea mitigation. When that was complete, I then had my interview, which involved, I think, around about 5 questions. And again, I won't go into details on that because I'm going to do another video specifically on the questions. And that was it. That concluded the meeting. And I just said thank you and then logged off. And literally 2 or 3 hours later, I got an email confirmation saying I got a place. That was really nice because it was a very fast response, very speedy response. So there wasn't too much waiting time, which was a blessing. And yeah, so I really enjoyed it. It went really well. A lot to learn straight away as soon as it finished. I just thought, wow, I've got a lot to learn, especially before going for pupillage. Overall, it was a really awesome selection event. All glory to God, I got my place. So that was my BPC selection event. That's it in a nutshell. That's the different elements to it. But for now, I hope you enjoyed the overview. As a standard, from Glasgow to Berlin, Sammy out.